If you indulge in science fiction from time to time, like I do, probably at least once or twice you've had that feeling. Ugh, that's too hard to understand to still stay fun. Like when you feel that your brain would face difficulties to get the idea, even being in focused classroom mood, let alone in a relaxed evening movie mood. And then you ask yourself, is it even worth to try to understand that fictional mechanic? Does it make any sense in terms of real life science, or is it just unobtainium and technobabble in service of plot needs? In other words, the question is, are we dealing with hard or soft science fiction? I've read, watched, and played hard science fiction for probably as long as I can remember myself. I love the feeling of a sophisticated underlying structure, a set of bones and organs of world building hidden beneath the skin of a story. Hard science fiction takes that a step further. Not only does it usually provide us with solid world building, but it's also something that is technically possible and can occur to us, at least hypothetically, and probably in remote future, but in real life. On the other hand, I can also understand those who stay on the soft side of sci-fi. At the end of the day, we all dive into fiction to escape the constraints of everyday life for a while. And when instead of a fantasy journey you get a lecture and a test in science, it's kinda human to feel annoyed. So many choose to go back to the safety of action-adventure with space laser dogfights, monsters from the ancient times, parallel dimensions, and high-tech artifacts from long-lost civilizations, which usually means whatever futuristic-looking stuff Disney is trying to sell us this season. I sometimes indulge in that kind of fiction as well, where you can hear lasers in space because it's cool, and don't suffer fates worse than death while traveling faster than light because that would be so uncool. Just enjoying the pure beauty and might of the glorious graphonium without trying to ever scratch its surface because there is probably nothing underneath. So here we have them, the hard and the soft science fiction. One more boring, but more accurate. The other more fun, but less scientific, right? Well, as it turns out, not exactly. There is an opinion that not all the branches of science were born equal. Some, it appears, are considered to be less scientific in their approach, like most of humanitarian sciences, for example. And sure, if we compare research papers of, say, linguistics and histopathology graduates, first one will surely have more text but less numbers and charts, and will thus look less sciencey in comparison. One might argue in defense of soft sciences, hey, but first and foremost, soft sciences study humans, and we humans are notoriously difficult to measure from the inside. Human being is full of uncertainties and surprises, and is hard to be put into numbers and charts. And, well, it's actually hard to deny that some humanitarian sciences really do deal with the aspects of human nature that are hard to measure and put into numbers and charts. On the other hand, some of these sciences, like economy for example, can gather and process amounts of data so impressive that even astrophysicists might be jealous. The subjects that soft sciences study, the people, are quite real and in fact might demand getting studied more than anything else on this planet. So I would assume that soft to hard science gradation in this dimension is more like a color spectrum with no superior or inferior disciplines. As long as it follows logic, math, scientific method, and general ethics, it's good science, regardless of whether it's soft or hard. If we follow that approach, the definition goes like that. Hard science fiction is the one that concentrates on the biological or mechanical structure of things, while soft science fiction is the one that explores the essence of being a human. And soft sci-fi is usually much less concerned about following the strict code of harder sciencey rules. However, I could name several so-called soft science fiction movies that do explore human nature and that do adhere to some standards of hard sciences nonetheless. And that doesn't make them worse, quite on the contrary. Take Eternal Sunshine of Spotless Mind, for example, a movie about difference between love and relationship, which surprisingly also does a good job in neurobiology. Is that movie hard or soft science fiction? The subject that it explores, why we love each other, is surely a matter of soft science. However, how the movie explores that, which is by erasing characters' memories with CT-directed gamma-ray blasts, well, that's some real hard science indeed. I mean, we fight brain tumors in similar way these days. That means, while it's ethically questionable, it might be technically possible to delete memories like that. Besides Eternal Sunshine, there are other good examples of soft sciences getting explored in quite a hard way. First thing that comes to my mind is Black Mirror, but it surely deserves its own video, so I won't go on about it here for now. The point I'm trying to make here is that nothing really ever stops science fiction authors from doing additional research on the real science side of things. We have internet these days, so almost anyone, given the will to learn, can within reasonable time acquire some knowledge in both physics and psychology, biology and economy, math and linguistics, and so on and so on. You get the point. I'd say there is hard science fiction, and then there is weak science fiction. Hard science fiction is crafted when authors adjust story to fit the scientific narrative and get creative within its boundaries. Weak science fiction appears when scientific gets replaced with fancy sciencey looking, usually to better suit the needs of resolving second and or third act, space-blessed laser fight with plot holes in world building, all that. But before you wage war on me, please note that I don't say weak science fiction is bad fiction. There are different degrees of weakness, and whether they are good or bad is a subjective thing. As it goes by definition, weak science fiction sacrifices some science to make for better fiction, so quite often it is a very good fiction indeed. So what can we make out of it all? Say, on x-axis we have gradient from soft sciences to hard sciences, and on y-axis we measure if it is actually hard or weak science. Unlike the regular science fiction hardness measure scales that I know of, this one provides somewhat more detailed view. Usually sci-fi hardness gets measured with a single label like hard, firm, soft, science fantasy, while in reality a single movie or a game or a book could have different degrees of hardness in different disciplines it touches. For the sake of YouTube video length issues, I'd rather simplify that scale. If I tried to use this as a tool to analyze some piece of science fiction, it would end up in a 2-hour-long video, which I am not crazy enough to animate. To fit in somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes, which I consider to be optimal YouTube video length, I'd rather shrink the scale like that: 5 grades of hardness and 4 main kingdoms of science. Here they are. The diamond tier, hardcore science fiction, the hardest there is, 100% possible in real-life conditions. Tungsten tier, hard science fiction, which is internally logical, mostly based on science, plus minus few minor flaws and or several laws of science that could yet be discovered. Also, I guess tungsten tier is as high as quality retrofuturism and steampunk could rise in ranks of sci-fi hardness. Iron and glass tier, average science fiction, which follows a few standards and has at least some basic scientific dignity, but has a lot of flaws too, and in the end strikes a solid middle ground between reality and entertainment. Rubber tier, weak science fiction, a category for stuff that tried to be hard at science and failed spectacularly, and also for good science fantasy that turns out to be somewhat scientific. And in the end we have cake tier, fairy tale, that's where we reach the condition of rainbow fairy pony prances over candy cloud. And then there are my 4 broad groups of science branches. Human, the softest sciences, ones that study arts, culture, psychology, religion and the such. Social, for disciplines such as law, politics and economy. Bio, the group for which I have personal weak spot and in which I am probably the most competent. And tech, the hardest sciences like physics, chemistry, math and logic. So, this measure scale has some potential, I presume, maybe even enough to build an entire YouTube channel upon it, but for starters it obviously needs some testing. As a matter of fact, I have some experience in the field of forensic anthropology, which is a branch of science that studies what happens to humans after death and helps the authorities to answer questions such as whose skull have we found here? Given that, I presume the most logical thing for me to do now would be to make a video about zombies in science fiction, which in turn means that I have some additional research and pixel art to do. So, see you in the next video! Thanks for watching, and if you want to support the channel, like, subscribe, and stay hardcore!